The text message came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, while I was standing at the kitchen counter waiting for my coffee to finish brewing. I remember because I had just checked the weather on my phone. They were calling for rain by noon, and then I saw my son-in-law's name on the screen. Not my daughter's, his. Harold, we need you to stop coming by the house unannounced. Fiona and I have talked about it. We need our space and our privacy. We're asking you to respect that. This is not up for discussion. I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and poured my coffee. I didn't call. I didn't text back. I just stood there looking out the window at the oak tree in my backyard, the one I'd planted the year Fiona was born, and I drank my coffee while it was still hot. Let me back up a little, because none of this came out of nowhere. My wife, Carol, passed 6 years ago. Breast cancer, stage 4, diagnosed in October and gone by the following June. We'd been married 31 years. After she died, it was just me in a 4-bedroom house in Naperville, Illinois, with a yard that was too big and evenings that were too quiet. Fiona is our only child. She married Derek, that's the son-in-law, about 4 years before her mother passed. Derek sells commercial insurance. He's the kind of man who talks a lot about optimizing things, his schedule, his portfolio, his lifestyle. When Fiona first brought him home, Carol whispered to me in the kitchen, "He's very polished." That was her way of saying she wasn't sure about him. Carol was always polite about things she wasn't sure about. They live about 22 minutes from me. I know because I drove it once and timed it, close enough to help, far enough that I always called ahead, or at least I thought I did. Here's what my life looked like in the 2 years before that text message. Every other Saturday I would bring groceries. Not because they asked me to, because Fiona mentioned once offhand that she never had time to get to the store before the weekend crowds hit, and I was retired and had nothing but time. So I started going. I'd pick up whatever was on the list she'd text me on Friday evenings, sometimes 12 items, sometimes 30, and I'd show up around 10 in the morning with 2 canvas bags from Mariano's. Derek's truck was always in the driveway on those Saturdays. He'd nod at me from the living room and go back to whatever he was watching. Beyond the groceries, I helped them refinance their house in 2023 when rates were all over the place. I co-signed because Derek's debt-to-income ratio was too high for the bank's liking. I didn't ask questions. I signed the papers. When their HVAC unit went out last July, full system compressor and everything, I wrote them a check for $8,400. I told them to pay me back when they could. Fiona hugged me. Derek said, "We'll get you back, Harold. He has not gotten me back." And their son, my grandson, Eli. I picked him up from school every Tuesday and Thursday because both of them worked late those days in daycare, charged by the minute after 5:30. I did that for a year and a half. I made him grilled cheese and we watched cartoons on my couch and he fell asleep half the time before his parents came to get him. Those Tuesday and Thursday evenings were the best part of my week. That was my life. Groceries, co-signatures, HVAC checks, Tuesday, Thursday pickup. And I genuinely believed that this was what family did. The text from Derek said unannounced. The word kept snagging in my mind because I had never not once shown up unannounced. Not to their home. I always texted Fiona the day before. Always. I wondered if Derek knew that. I wondered if he'd asked her. I waited 3 days before I called Fiona. She answered on the second ring, which told me she was expecting the call. Her voice had that careful, pressed quality, like she was reading from something she'd rehearsed. "Dad, I know you got Derek's message. I did. We just feel like we need to establish some clearer boundaries around our home and our time together as a family. Derek feels like we don't have enough of that." I sat down in my armchair, the old one, green corduroy, been in my living room since 1997. I looked at the wall where Carol's handwriting was still on the frame of a cross-stitch she made. "Home is wherever we're together." She made it as a joke, kind of. We'd bought a fixer-upper in '91 that fell apart for 3 years before it started feeling like home. "Fiona," I said, "I call ahead. I always call ahead. I know, Dad. And every other Saturday, you're the one who sends me the grocery list." Silence. "I hear you," she finally said. "But Derek we feel like having a set schedule would help, and maybe less frequent, maybe once a month. Once a month, I did the math quickly, silently. Once a month, I would see Eli twice, instead of 8 or 9 times, 8 or 9 to twice. What about Tuesday and Thursday pickups, I asked. Derek thinks Eli is old enough for after-school care now. He's 7. I didn't say anything for a moment. Okay, I said. Are you upset? I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll let you go. I hung up and sat in that green chair for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who yells. I never have been. When Fiona was a teenager and we disagreed about things, curfews, a boy she liked who I didn't trust, the year she decided to take a gap year before college, I always sat down and talked it through. Carol used to say I was too measured. Sometimes, Harold, you can just be mad, she'd tell me. But that's not how I'm built. So I did not yell. I did not write a long emotional text message. I did not call Derek to ask him what his problem was. I just started thinking. The first call I made was to my financial advisor, a woman named Paulette, who has managed my retirement account since I sold my landscaping business in 2019. I sold it for $340,000, which is not a fortune, but is also not nothing for a man who started it with a used riding mower and a pickup truck in 1988. I want to review everything, I told Paulette. Beneficiaries, the house, everything. She asked if everything was okay. I told her everything was fine. I just wanted to make sure my documents reflected where I actually wanted things to go. She said she'd pull the files and we'd meet Thursday. The second call I made was to my attorney, a man named Bill, who handled Carol's estate and has done my taxes and legal work for 20 years. I told him the same thing. I wanted to look at my will, my trust, all of it. He asked if I was sick. I almost laughed. No, I said. Just prudent. I want to explain something here, because I imagine some people would hear this and think I was being vindictive. I was 67 years old. I had assets, a mortgage I co-signed on someone else's house, and a will that had not been updated since my wife died. It was, honestly, overdue. But yes, the text also had something to do with it. I won't pretend otherwise. I stopped bringing groceries. I didn't make a show of it. I just didn't text Fiona that Friday, and she didn't send me a list, and Saturday came and went. I spent that morning driving out to Starved Rock State Park and walking the canyon trails by myself for 3 hours. The leaves were just starting to turn. It was beautiful. I had a sandwich I'd packed from home, and I sat on a rock above the Illinois River and ate it alone and thought about nothing in particular. That was a Saturday I would have spent in their kitchen, putting away cereal boxes. A few weeks later, I called the co-signer release hotline for the mortgage company. I knew it was likely a long process and might not succeed immediately. Co-signers rarely get released easily, but I wanted to start the paperwork. I wanted to understand what my exposure was. I wanted my name off of documents that tied me to a household that had decided I was an imposition. I also spoke to my accountant about restructuring the HVAC loan, the $8,400 I'd never been paid back for. We drafted a short promissory note, simple language, and I had it delivered by certified mail. Not threatening, just formal, because informal had not worked. Derek called me the day he received it. It was the first time he'd called me directly in over a year. Harold, what is this? It's a promissory note, Derek, for the money I lent you in July. We said we'd pay you back. You did say that. This just puts a timeline to it. He was quiet for a moment. Are you serious right now? I'm always serious about money, I said. It's just good practice. He hung up before I did. Fiona called an hour later. Her voice was different this time. The rehearsed quality was gone.
Dad, Derek is upset. I can imagine.
He says you sent a formal letter.
Like you're taking us to court or something.
It's not a lawsuit, Fiona. It's a promissory note. Your husband's name is on a loan for an HVAC system I paid for. I'd just like something in writing. You never needed anything in writing before? No, I said, I didn't. She heard what I didn't say. I could tell because the line went quiet in a way that was different from before. Not the silence of someone choosing words, but the silence of someone understanding something they hadn't meant to have to understand. Dad, she said softly. I'm not angry, sweetheart, I said, and I meant it. I was many things, but angry wasn't the word. Tired, maybe. Clarified. like something had finally come into focus that had been blurry for a long time. "I'll call you next week," I said. "Give Eli a hug for me." I started filling the space differently. I called my old friend Raymond. We went to high school together in Rockford and had stayed loosely in touch for 40 years, and we drove up to Wisconsin for a weekend in October. Stayed in a cabin near Lake Geneva that his brother owns, fished a little, grilled steaks, talked about nothing important. I hadn't done anything like that in years. Carol was sick for so long, and then after she died, I'd spent so much energy orbiting my daughter's life that I'd forgotten I had one of my own. I joined a woodworking class at the community center in Wheaton. Every Wednesday evening, 6 o'clock, I'd always wanted to learn. I made a crooked little side table my first month that I put next to my bed, and I was more proud of it than I'd been of most things in recent memory. I started going to church again, not because I'd found religion, but because I missed the community. I'd stopped going after Carol died. Too hard to sit in the pew where we always sat, on the left side, 5 rows from the front. But a neighbor invited me to a different church across town, smaller, warmer somehow, and I started going on Sunday mornings. And those Sunday mornings began to feel like mine again. Eli's birthday came in November. I mailed a card with a check inside, a generous one, because none of what had happened was his fault. And I wrote him a note in my best handwriting telling him I loved him and that we'd go to the museum together soon, just the two of us, whenever his parents said it was okay. I did not show up at the party. It was a Saturday in January, the kind of gray, still January morning that feels like the world has pressed pause. When my doorbell rang at 8:45 in the morning, I was in the kitchen. I'd been up since 6:30, which is my natural rhythm. I'd already made a full pot of coffee, read the Tribune on my iPad, and started on a crossword I'd printed from a puzzle book I got for Christmas. I was in my robe. I was not expecting anyone. I opened the door and Derek was standing on my porch. He had on a jacket that wasn't warm enough for the weather, and he was holding his car keys in his hand like he'd been gripping them the whole drive over. I looked at him. "Derek, can I come in?" I stepped back and let him in. He stood in my entryway and looked around like he hadn't been in my house in a while, which he hadn't, not really, not as a guest in his own right. He'd always come with Fiona, always moving through the space like it was a waiting room. I brought him coffee without asking. He took it. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to sit with Fiona when she was little, doing homework. The same table where Carol and I had every serious conversation we ever had. Derek wrapped both hands around the mug. He looked at the table for a long time before he looked at me. "I got laid off 3 weeks ago," he said. I didn't say anything. The company restructured, eliminated the whole regional sales division. It wasn't performance-based, they made that very clear, but it's still. He stopped. "Fiona doesn't want to worry anyone, so we haven't told people. But things are tight. We have the mortgage, and Eli's after school is more than we thought, and we're behind on the credit card from when we redid the kitchen last spring, and—" He stopped again. I got up and refilled my own coffee, even though it didn't need refilling, just something to do with my hands for a moment. "How long do you have?" I asked. "On savings," he exhaled slowly. 3 months, maybe 4 if we're careful." I sat back down. He looked at me then, really looked at me in a way he never quite had before. And I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. Not entitlement, not calculation, but something plain and uncomfortable. Embarrassment. Real embarrassment, the kind that has no performance in it. "I know I'm not your favorite person," he said. "You're my daughter's husband," I said, "and Eli's father. That means something to me." He nodded at the table. "I handled this badly," he said. "The text. All of it. I convinced Fiona that we needed more distance, and I think I framed it the wrong way. You've never been anything but generous with us, and I made you feel like you were in the way. That wasn't right. I've thought a lot about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't triumph. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to say it was, and that would make for a cleaner story. But what I actually felt was something closer to grief. Grief that it had taken this to get us here. Grief for the Tuesdays and Thursdays I'd missed with Eli. Grief for all the ways families can fail each other while meaning at some level to do the opposite. You should have talked to me, I said finally. Like this, like a man talking to another man. I know you didn't have to use my daughter as a messenger, and you didn't have to be dismissive about everything I'd done to help you, but I also should have said something instead of just swallowing it. He nodded. I'm not a bank, Derek. I'm a person, and I'd like to be treated like one. He looked up. You're right, you absolutely are. We sat there for a while longer. The January light came in gray and thin through the kitchen window, and somewhere outside a car started and drove away. The house was very quiet. I'll keep paying my own way, I said eventually. My savings, my house, my life, those are mine, and they'll stay that way. But if Fiona needs help in the next few months, I'm not going to turn my back on her or on Eli. He nodded again. His jaw worked for a second like he might say something else. But I'm done being invisible, I said. Eli needs his grandfather, and I need him. That doesn't go away because it's inconvenient. Derek drove back home an hour later. Fiona called me that evening. She cried a little. I told her I loved her. She said she was sorry. I said I knew. And then I asked about Eli, and she put him on the phone, and he told me all about a book he was reading for school about a boy who raises a bear cub. And I sat in my green chair and listened and laughed in all the right places. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, I picked him up from school. He climbed into my car and threw his backpack in the back seat and said, Grandpa, did you know some trees can live for 3,000 years? I told him I did not know that. I want to plant one, he said. I told him that sounded like a very good idea, and that we'd do it in the spring when the ground softened up, and that we'd put it somewhere in my yard where it would have room to grow. He thought about that for a second, watching the houses go by out the window. Will you still be alive when it's big? He asked. The question was so honest, the way only a 7-year-old can be honest, that I almost had to pull over. No, I told him. Probably not, but you will be, and so will your kids, maybe. And they'll walk past it, and someone will tell them their great-grandfather planted that. He thought about this with the gravity that only children give to genuinely serious things. That's kind of cool, he said. Yeah, I said. It kind of is. I drove us back to my house and made grilled cheese, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I thought about the oak tree in my backyard, the one I planted the year Fiona was born, and how it's taller than my roofline now, and how Carol always sat under it in the summer with her book, and how none of that is gone exactly. Just changed. Just moved into a different kind of keeping. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. You think the losses accumulate until there's nothing left. But what actually happens is you get better at holding things. You learn to hold the grief and the grilled cheese and the 7-year-old's questions all at the same time, in the same hands, without dropping any of it. Eli finished his sandwich and asked if we could watch something, and I said yes. And he picked something I'd never heard of, and I sat next to him on the couch and watched it anyway. That was enough. That was more than enough.